This is the Robert Hanna Show.
Spreck, appreciate you being here.
My pleasure, Robert. Great to be here. Great to talk about Hetchy.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation because I know that this is a topic that is really important to both of us. And that topic is restoring the Hetchy Valley inside Yosemite National Park. I really appreciate you being here. A lot of people know the story of Hetchy, but for those that aren't familiar, when you go into Yosemite National Park, there are two incredible valleys. There is the Yosemite Valley, which everybody knows. That's the one when you're in, you're met by the incredible views of El Capitan, Half Dome, and all of the other world famous incredible places. Yosemite's sister valley, Hetchy, is tucked away in the northwest boundary of the park. And unlike Yosemite Valley, you cannot experience it by walking or driving around the park. Because over 100 years ago, the city of San Francisco was given permission to destroy that valley and flood it under hundreds of feet of water. And today there are many restrictions around what you can and can't do around that. So that kind of in a nutshell sets the table for our conversation today. Spreck, you're the executive director of the organization Restore Hetchy, and I've always had the utmost respect for you. In my opinion, you cannot tell the story of Hetchy without you, because for decades you have every single day been fighting this battle and making sure that you keep this story going to the American public. And quite honestly, what's in front of us is the greatest opportunity for the largest restoration project in history. Nowhere else in the planet can you give back the people of our country and to the world another Yosemite Valley, and that's what's in front of us. So I know we're going to get into quite a bit of things, but I just kind of wanted to throw it over to you real quick. If you could just kind of throw out there for people your background and a little bit more about your organization, Restore Hetchy.
Well, Robert, thanks so much. And let me first say that if it were about the water, if you couldn't still get water to San Francisco and to all those people in the Bay Area, we wouldn't be doing this. But there are so many ways to do that. We'll get into that in a little bit. It's not about the water, it's about the will. And this would be the greatest restoration project in many ways ever, anywhere. And so it's something that I've been involved in for 25 years now, half of which I've been executive director of Restore Hetchy. But I got started, I was an analyst with the Environmental Defense Fund. I was sort of the number cruncher, the water and power guy. And when they asked me to, Ron Good, the founder of Restore Hetchy, asked me to look at the numbers, to look at how the system works and everything. And I found the same thing that Don Hodel found when he was Secretary of Interior, that
under Ronald Reagan,
by rerouting the pipes a little bit, and you can make everybody whole with respect to the water supply. You have to do some sort of investment, and folks have to cooperate with how water moves down the Tuolumne. But there's no reason you have to use that iconic, spectacular valley in Yosemite National Park as a water tank. You just don't.
Yeah, and Don Hodel, when he came out with that in the 80s, it really caught a lot of people off guard. And for a long time, this conversation was one, that, was being told, but, for Reagan's Secretary of the Interior to come out, I mean, that was quite a surprise, was it not?
It was a surprise, and it's kind of the same thing today, that sometimes the merits of an issue, in this case, an iconic environmental issue, don't neatly fall along party lines. Mm-hmm. And we've always been strictly nonpartisan. Most of our supporters are probably your traditional tree huggers and granola crunchers, but right. There are folks who are probably Republicans that support us as well. And we're just looking at it straight ahead, looking at what it takes to fix the water supply so nobody loses a drop of water, and then the more challenging part is how to manage the institutions and the political people that are willing to cut a deal to make this happen. But we need to restore Hetchy. We need to make Yosemite National Park whole once again, and in doing so, inspire a whole new generation to respect not just Yosemite but all our wild places.
Yeah, I agree. We've talked a lot about, it's the great one of the greatest opportunities of our time, and it's just time to act. There have been so many different studies, starting with Don Hodell's study all the way till current, and I've read every single page of every single report, and I know you have, and you've participated in a lot of them. But what's fascinating to me is going back to every single one of them points to restoration being feasible without the city of San Francisco and all of the Bay Area communities who rely on the water wouldn't lose their water supply. And, with, the power and things like that. And a lot of people don't realize that, Hetchy is not San Francisco's water source. The Tuolumne River is the water source. Hetchy is just the valley that was destroyed so that the O'Shaughnessy Dam could be built there. But with all of those reports that have been done, could you maybe just walk through, starting the Hodell, and just kind of, highlight each report? Because it has been through many different, administrations, whether it was, the Reagan, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, President George Bush was going to allocate funds to look at this. In California here, then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger put forth, the study. But could you kind of walk people through, each of those studies, the environmental defense one, and just kind of give them a snapshot of what each of them were and what they said?
Sure. I think it was Hodell proposed restoration in 1987. 1988, the Bureau of Reclamation came out with a sort of overview report about who gets water from the Tuolumne River and where water is stored. Hetchy is far from the only reservoir on the Tuolumne River. Don Pedro downstream holds 6 times as much water. San Francisco has an interest in that. There's also Cherry Lake and Eleanor, which hold about as much water as Hetchy. So Hetchy is about 1/8 of the storage. And Hodell's report sort of tiered off on that and showed that water could be rerouted and sent to not only the Bay Area and San Francisco, but also the Turlock and Modesto irrigation districts, who actually use more of the river's flow. And so the next set of reports came in the early 2000s. UC Davis, Professor Jay Lund, and then a graduate student, now Professor Sarah Lund, did a report using UC Davis models. And then when I was at the Environmental Defense Fund, we did a study called Paradise Regained that we, 4 or 5 staff members, wrote the report, but half the report is appendices that were done by mainstream engineers and two by mainstream engineers and a third by a mainstream attorney about what it would take to make happen. So we relied on not sort of the, just what the environmentalists are saying, but what regular people say who do these sorts of analyses, and showed that was feasible. Restore Hetchy also came up with a similar report about, I guess, 2006, 2007. So it's pretty much been established. And then a couple years ago, at Restore Hetchy, we summarized some of those things and then updated it with what other California water agencies have done over the last 20 years in 3 areas, any one of which could easily make everybody whole. One is to bank groundwater with Turlock and Modesto and the East Side Water District. That's the biggest growth in water storage in California, certainly in Kern County and the Mojave Desert and elsewhere. Another is to recycle water, as we're doing mostly in Southern California, but in Northern California as well. And then a third way is to expand local storage, as we've done in many parts of California, San Diego and the Los Angeles area, and Contra Costa County. And in San Francisco's case, it would be expanding the Calaveras Reservoir. But any of these things could replace that storage and make everybody whole with respect to water supply. And these things have done. These projects in the last 20 years have replaced probably 15 or 16 times as much water as San Francisco would need. And this is all summarized in our report, Yosemite's Opportunity, and it's on our website and available to anybody who wants to look at it.
One quick thing, a lot of people in opposition to the idea of restoring the Hetchy Valley have pointed to, lost water. What would we do with the power? How would we, regain some of that? What do you say to that piece of it?
Well, so the water is the main piece that people talk about. And before we move on to power, let me say that people talk about the high quality of San Francisco's water, and it is high quality. It's good water. But there's lots of other good water sources out there. We did a taste test last summer, a double-blind taste test initiated with graduate students from University of Colorado, of a double-blind taste test of East Bay water, Marin water, and San Francisco water. And San Francisco came in third consistently. So people actually like the other water better. It's and all these sources are better than what you get out of the Delta and what you get from the Colorado River. And that water doesn't taste as good. But San Francisco's water, if it wasn't stored in Hetchy, if it was taken downstream, would certainly be great, and people wouldn't notice the difference.
And then for the storage part, that's a part that comes up quite a bit. The system is a gravity-fed system, so could you talk a little bit about that and where a lot of that power could be?
The water comes to San Francisco gravity-fed, and it would still largely be gravity-fed. There are three principal power plants in the Sierra that San Francisco operates, and one of those would be affected. You lose about half the power from San Francisco's Kirkwood plant, and that would have to be replaced. We recommend solar power. The amount of power is about 350 gigawatt hours a year, if we know what a gigawatt hour is, but it's about half the electricity lost when they shut down the power plants on the Klamath River when we took down those dams. And people seemed okay with losing that power, replacing that with other sources. And again, we recommend solar, but power comes in a mix of things, and might come in wind or might come in something else. But that is a factor, but that's not as politically divisive as the water piece.
Yeah, and I've in a lot of in those reports I've read that much of the power in the water could no doubt be replaced, or with the water too. I read I know that there's many different options, but I also read that if you and I today were to take all of the water out of Hetchy and just move it downstream to the Don Pedro, it would raise Don Pedro only 30 feet. Not saying that that's the solution, but just to give people out there an idea of how realistic that this could be done. I read that and I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, Don Pedro is six times the size of Hetchy. Hetchy is, I think it's their 20th largest dam in California. It was the biggest when it was built.
Right.
But since that time, we've built large storage reservoirs in the foothills on every major California stream at least once.
And then San Francisco, there, walk me through just the water system. San Francisco has 9 reservoirs in their water system. Is that correct? And you touched earlier on Lake Eleanor. A lot of people don't realize that's also in Yosemite National Park's boundaries, correct?
Yeah, Lake Eleanor is not that big, but water is diverted from Lake Eleanor into Cherry Lake,
right? Which is just outside of the boundary.
Outside the park, and that allows San Francisco to capture water on Eleanor Creek, which is a tributary of the Tuolumne.
Right.
And so that's a big piece of their their water supply as well.
Right. Now, let's take a step back. You know, what led to the dam being built, you know, and destroying the Hetchy Valley? I know that, you know, for me, it's always been an emotional story for me and my family because it was my great-great-grandfather John Muir's last battle. He spent close to the last decade of his life fighting to prevent it, and in many ways was successful to a certain point until certain, you know, things took place historically, and then the political deck was just quickly stacked against him. But let's maybe go back, and I'd love for you to kind of give a snapshot of what led to that point. And with, you know, San Francisco finally getting permission, what were some of the perks that they have today that exist that no other city has? I'll let you kind of take
and first of all, this was the only time in American history we've allowed a city to develop a national park. And since that time, folks have tried and failed. And it's really a fluke that it happened in the first time. What John Muir did in creating Yosemite National Park in our third national park in 1890 and encouraging and really publicizing the idea of national parks nationwide and how wonderful they were is unprecedented and not just in this country, but famous around the world. And San Francisco asked, they looked at Hetchy as early as 1890 and then asked a couple times in the early 1900s for permission to build a dam in a national park. They were told, no, can't do it. They had this in a national park. You guys don't get it. And so in early, I think 1905, 1906, shortly before the big earthquake that hit San Francisco, the Board of Supervisors voted to give up on Hetchy, and they were going to try and develop water elsewhere. And then a couple things happened. First of all, the mayor of San Francisco was on the take, and he was being bribed to support a different water project. At that time, the 1906 earthquake hit literally while he was on trial, and his henchman, Boss Roof, was on trial. The earthquake hit, and water mains within the city broke, and you couldn't put out the fire. And so the narrative became, and this might be familiar to today because there's been a fire in Los Angeles, and there was water in the reservoirs down there, but not the firefighting reservoirs. But they couldn't fight the fire in San Francisco because the water mains in the city had broken. There was water in local reservoirs outside the city, but didn't do San Francisco any good. And the fire burned down much of the city. And so the political drive that it needed water and needed help to help the city grow and rebuild became politically strong. And
they used the emotion of the incident to say, had we have had this water.
Yeah. And if you read some of the senators' statements in the record when the Raker Act was under consideration in 1913, then that's exactly what they said. But they were still resisting. And San Francisco, when President Roosevelt sort of flinched a little bit, President Taft went to Yosemite and sent his Secretary of Interior to Hetchy, ordered a study, and so it was still delayed for a few years. And then when Taft left office, San Francisco offered to support Woodrow Wilson for president if he promised to appoint their city attorney, Franklin Lane, Secretary of Interior. And so there was a political deal cut. And so Franklin Lane was in Washington helping to support what later became the Raker Act that allowed the damming of Hetchy. And
Woodrow Wilson won in an upset against Taft.
Well, yeah, and that was the famous Bull Moose election when Roosevelt had come back. He wanted to, he didn't like what Taft had done, so he and and Taft split the Republican Party,
Right.
and allowed Wilson to become president. So it's
And then it
a
quit.
whole conflagration of events. Otherwise, Hetchy would never have been damned. But here we are today, and that's all in the past, and
Right.
and we're looking forward to the future, and dams are hugely important to our economy and to our way of life, to our cities, to our farms. But we're starting to rethink a few dams.
Mm-hmm.
We've taken out dams on the Klamath. We've taken out a few other dams that mostly for fish passage, and there's other places where we're looking at things. And Hetchy is certainly one that merits removal, relocation, and this is a landscape that is rightfully part of Yosemite National Park, and it's rightfully belongs to the American people, and it's something that's got to be done, and it would inspire people for decades to come if we're able to restore Hetchy to its natural splendor and make Yosemite whole once again.
Yeah, I mean, it's an absolute no-brainer. And that's, going back, all of the reports say it's possible. We know that it's possible. The science is done. It says it's possible. And we need to act now. I mean, it is now time. We have done all of the studies. And to your point, this could absolutely be done in a win-win situation where we give the world back another Yosemite Valley. And that cannot be done anywhere else. It would be the greatest, restoration project. It would serve as an international classroom for the entire world to come and witness the jobs that it would create, the economic boom that it would create in those regions. What are we doing? Like what? I mean, it makes zero sense. I read there was a report recently about the income that it would bring to that area.
Yeah.
I mean, can you touch a little bit on that?
It would be huge. It would be huge for benefits for the people that go there and for the businesses in the area, and it would just open up the whole north side of the park. There are certainly people who say, "Hey, wait a minute! Look how crowded Yosemite Valley is, and you want to do that again in Hetchy?" And our answer is that it's a blank slate, and we have the opportunity to maybe avoid some of the congestion we've seen in Yosemite, but still find a way to welcome visitors, to welcome people to go back and see what was lost and is being regained.
I agree 100% with you. I think that, when I hear that argument, to me, it's ridiculous. I mean, to your point, we have a blank canvas where we could avoid so many of the mistakes that have been done with Yosemite Valley, and without a doubt, do it in a way where we could do it the right way.
Right, and people are going to differ on that, on exactly what the right way is, and I'd love to have that conversation, and I think we'd find a way to avoid some of the traffic and congestion, but still welcome people, protect wildlife for sure, and it could be a model for other parks to come, and it's an really exciting opportunity, and I'm so glad to be part of this, and hope that folks listening to this podcast will learn about restoring Hetchy, support us politically, support us as an organization, and help make this vision a reality.
Yeah, one of the exciting things is, I've experienced it firsthand. I know you have. This is an effort that is. It's received a lot of bipartisan support. I mean, former Congressman Dan Lundgren, former Senator Lois Wolk. Right. Many different political figures behind the scenes. This is being talked about today.
Yeah,
it's being talked about in the halls of the California State Capitol. It is being talked about in Washington. That to me is really exciting. I know that Congressman Tom McClintock just introduced some legislation to expand access.
Right.
A lot of people, when you go to the Hetchy Valley, there are many restrictions. Whether from you can't even touch the water to you can't be there at a certain time. Can you kind of go into a little bit about the restrictions that are in that part of the valley?
Yeah, sure. We believe that, and we support improved access even while the dam is in place for several reasons. First of all, it's a beautiful place, and if you can get there and explore more, if you could camp there, which you can't. San Francisco has cabins that they're allowed to use, but regular people can't go and camp there.
Which, not to interrupt you, it's outrageous. I believe that they have 5 cabins there that are for the elites of San Francisco. That, I mean, just a quick Google search will it's completely outrageous. It is such it's so counter to what our parks are, and the fact that they have, these structures there where the elite of the elite in San Francisco go. That I didn't mean to cut you off, but it's just it's absolutely outrageous.
It's outrageous indeed, and so we'd like to frankly repurpose those for public use in some way. We'd like people to be able to camp there so they can see the sunset and sunrise. We'd like the gates to be open 24 hours like they are everywhere else in Yosemite.
Yeah,
and we'd also like people to be able to boat on the reservoir. For a couple of reasons. First of all, it's just the best way to see the canyon. Second of all, if you could take a boat across the reservoir, you could have a 1-hour walk up, leisurely stroll to Rancheria Falls. Rock climbers could go up to Hetchy Dome. Fishermen could fish Till Creek, Rancheria Creek, or the Tuolumne River where it comes into Hetchy.
Mm-hmm.
And none of these things are possible. It's a whole day for a young, vigorous hiker to get to Rancheria Falls and back in a day.
Mm-hmm.
And so all these things are not really possible like they are in Yosemite Valley. And these were things that Congress assumed when they passed the Raker Act. They talked about boating and camping ad nauseum, but it hasn't come to pass. The Park Service has sort of been in cahoots with San Francisco, and in fairness, they've got a busy job. They've got a tough park to manage. They've neglected it. San Francisco has kept their pedal to the metal on keeping people out. And so Congressman McClintock and others and his co-sponsors have been looking at improving access through legislation. Some of these things could be done administratively by the Department of Interior, and we're talking to them as well. But we like the idea of this legislation. We haven't seen all the details yet, so we're not fully supporting it, but it's time to make some changes at Hetchy, and we believe that if more people go there and realize what is there, they will come to support relocating that dam and restoring the valley to its natural splendor the way it was 120 years ago.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to see those types of solutions from the congressman being put forth and discussed. And to your point, you're 100% right. When the Raker Act was put forth in front of Washington, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a booklet and there was artist illustrations given to each member of Congress of boats on Hetchy. You could do a quick Google search and find it. And there's, cars driving around, and once the Raker Act was signed by Woodrow Wilson, they went in, and instead of allowing any of that, they completely shut off all of it. Am I correct?
Yeah. So the booklet you're referring to was actually the Freeman Report, which is several hundred pages long, and it's maybe 400 pages, and it's got a lot of engineering in it. But the first 50 pages are showing how Hetchy would be this great recreational paradise, and they've got boats all over the reservoir. Mm-hmm. And so it was San Francisco's own materials. Congressmen and the senators talked about taking a boat out there and fishing. And as soon as the dam was completed, the the superintendent of Yosemite, Horace Albright, who became the second director of the National Park Service, folks may have heard of Horace, hired a concessionaire to run tour boats on Hetchy, and San Francisco opposed them and managed to get them to stop, even though they had promoted it in the first place. And so today, the boats that we're imagining wouldn't be these steam-powered things. They'd probably be, they'd either be rentals of canoes and kayaks, or maybe a quiet, non-polluting electric tour boat, something consistent with the scenery, but something that visitors would just love. We'd also love to see a very short, expanded hiking trail to the top of the North Rim, so people could go and get that whole view of the canyon.
Yeah, it's spectacular. I mean, when I go there, it's I can see it without the water, and that for me is it's one of the hardest things, is just to see the opportunity in front of us. And one of the other things in the Raker Act was, I believe that at the time, the agreement was the city of San Francisco would pay the federal government $30,000 a year in exchange for using Hetchy. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then what people don't realize is, do you know how much today San Francisco pays? The same amount. They only pay $30,000.
Well, they pay $30,000 in so-called rent. They do reimburse the park for security and watershed protection, but the actual payment for using the park is $30,000 a year. You can't rent a studio apartment in San Francisco for that these days.
I mean, you can't even buy a new car.
Yeah.
And that's I believe, I'm not 100% certain on this, but I also believe that that's part of Congressman McClintock's package. Where he talks about in there. I think so. I might be wrong.
Well, so the current version has no text. He introduced a version 2 years ago, which spoke to that, right. and he's mentioned that. So
it could or could not be in the current form. I got you. And also we talk about that once they got the Raker Act signed, they completely went against what they pitched to Congress. If you go today, you can't touch the water. Why is that? The
Park Service won't allow you to. Not to get into too much detail, but the superintendent's so-called compendium that sets the rules said it was because of the restrictions in the Raker Act, and we pointed out that the Raker Act specifically says does not allow them to use the Raker Act for that ruling, so that they came back and said, well, it's the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act and the National Park Service Organic Act. We have discretion to keep people from getting near the water. So you can fish only if the reservoir is totally full, but reservoirs, of course, go up and down. So maybe for a couple of weeks of the year you could fish. And for that reason, you can't take a boat as well. By the way, there are 38 reservoirs in California that hold more than 200,000 acre feet of water, and 37 of them allow boating and fishing. And you can guess which Hetchy does not, but 37 out of 38 allow boating and fishing. Reservoirs are popular for recreation. Many people bemoan the loss of our rivers, and rivers are of course especially beautiful, but we recognize the need for, when we do recognize the need for reservoirs, we generally think of them as places where people like to recreate as well. And Hetchy is the one where you can't, out of those 38, where you can't take a boat and you can't fish. Now, because of the restriction of not letting people touch the water, is that how San Francisco is able to avoid having to do filtration? That was the Park Service's concern, which and the Raker Act specifically says the Park Service has no business in whether San Francisco filters the water or not. The Raker Act says if San Francisco has to filter the water, so be it, and they have to pay for it. But that's likely a motivation of San Francisco's. Gotcha. I mean, it's just
there's so much to it that makes you angry. There's also been many, many documented cases from the time the Raker Act went into effect of San Francisco violating the Raker Act in many certain ways. Are you familiar with, all of them, or are there?
I'm certainly familiar with the sale of power.
What's that?
And so the Raker Act says they have to sell power only to the public, and they can't sell it to PG&E, which is a private utility, and so that's not something, frankly, we've really been involved in this, but many people have been upset for decades about that, and
So walk me through, what was it in the Raker Act?
So the Raker Act says that the power can only be sold to public agencies. And bear in mind the at the turn of the 20th century, that rural electrification was a big deal because cities were being electrified, and the countryside, smaller communities weren't getting electricity, and so there was a big movement to encourage utilities to provide so-called public power in many parts of the country. And so the Raker Act took up on that and said, any electricity has to be sold to public agencies, not to private utilities. And they were breaking that. And during the 1930s, Secretary of Interior under Franklin Roosevelt, Harold Ickes, was up in arms taking San Francisco to court and threatened to take the project away from them. And it was hugely controversial, and then the only thing that could maybe put that on the back burner was the attack on Pearl Harbor in World War II, and the issue was dropped.
Gotcha. It's just, I can't even you try to think about even today, like if you got word that somebody was going to go into Yosemite Valley and destroy it and flood it under hundreds of feet of water. I mean, you'd think to yourself, how did this happen? But it did happen. Everything we just discussed. It's such a reminder of why the power of a voice is so important, and to fight for what you believe in. And even with all of that said, what stands in front of us we've said it a couple times. What stands in front of us is one of the greatest opportunities on earth.
It is a great opportunity, and people need to understand both the opportunity for restoration and the feasibility of it, and maybe thirdly that the political landscape is changing.
Yeah.
The probably most powerful, fiercest opponent is Senator Feinstein, former Mayor Feinstein, is no longer with us. And whether it's new folks in charge of San Francisco or in Sacramento or in Washington, it's time to take a fresh look at this and think about how great this would be for our national parks for the future generations, and how this is just something that whose time has come.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I mean, this isn't a matter of left or right. It's right or wrong. And that's the beauty of it, is this effort has so much bipartisan support. It has support from people all across the state, all across the country. Just as you saw, during the battle to protect Hetchy, people from all across the country, we're trying to protect this incredible treasure for the world. And you're starting to see that today. The story, especially with all of these different platforms and things that we have. And again, going back to, it's exciting. It's exciting to know that the opportunity to restore the Hetchy Valley is being talked about in, different, political buildings across the country. And I think it's an incredible time. I mean, I would love to see it in my time. But just to know that my kids and my grandkids could walk in that valley just as I do Yosemite Valley, that's worth doing everything that we can now to have this conversation. And we owe it. We owe it to the future generations who are looking at us to act right now. And it's coming. It's not coming. It's here.
And imagine a family going to see the valley when the reservoir is first emptied, and you go there a few years in, and the grasses and sedges are there, the river's back, trees are tiny, animals have come back, and then that family comes back 5 years later, and 10 years later, and 20 years later, and the trees are growing, the kids are growing, they have kids of their own, and the experience that would bring to so many families, American families and visitors from around the world, and they'd see this landscape come back, and they'd be inspired to say, what can we do in our own communities that's like this?
100%.
What can we bring back? And so that's sort of what inspires me, is that this is a project for the future, for future generations, for you and me and the people that come after us.
Yeah. In all of the reports, there's been restoration studies. I know that you know inside and out about those, and you've participated in a lot of those reports. What has been said about the process of restoration?
Most of these reports about the actual restoration itself sort of look at three different levels. One is do nothing, just wait and watch. Another is to do minor things, plant trees where we know they were before, recruit volunteers to keep out invasive species and so forth. And then the third is to do something with more intervention. Mm-hmm. And I think a moderate approach to plant trees and to keep out invasive species and let the indigenous species reestablish themselves. But for the most part, it's going to come back on its own.
Yeah. And what was the timeline given in the past, like from the time that we begin this process to a fully restored Hetchy Valley?
Well, the Park Service said that within 2 or 3 years, the wildlife would return. You'd have your grasses and sedges and so forth. Be a couple decades when you have still a mark on the side from where the reservoir was, where the lichen didn't grow on the rocks.
And that'll go away eventually.
And that'll go away eventually, and then takes several decades, of course, to regrow the mature forest. But it's going to be spectacular almost right away.
Yeah, and like to your point, we're already seeing it. Whether it was the Elwha Dam or other, within 10 years, those places have come completely back to life. And these are all things that you can go research and see live cameras and things like that. I mean, so it's...
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that it's going to be spectacular. It's going to be wonderful. It's going to be energizing.
Right. What a lot of debate too has always been around the cost, because there's such a wide, kind of range from the low to the high, estimates. What is the cost of restoring the Hetchy Valley? I know that there's been talks to keep the dam actually in place, to save so much of that, if not most of it. But what are the costs associated to this conversation?
Yeah, so the principal cost, or the actual restoration of the valley, is minimal. The principal costs are rerouting the water system and building new storage somewhere else, replacing electricity, and then the dam removal. Mm-hmm. And the most recent estimate that we submitted to the California courts when we unfortunately did not prevail was over 50 years at $2 billion, and about a third of that was electricity, a third water, and a third removing the dam. And if the dam's not removed, then you save money. And there have been arguments to actually use the dam for infrastructure and then eliminate the need to have any intervention in the valley whatsoever, and maybe
Which would save
no roads
so
in the
much,
valley,
right?
and it's counterintuitive to begin with, but when you get there, you see this big dam. But if you're a mile into the valley or half a mile into the valley, you've got 2,000-foot cliffs on either side of you, and somewhere down there's a 300-foot concrete wall. And then if you're a mile into the valley, you're around the corner of Kelowna Rock, and
Yeah.
you wouldn't see the dam in the first place.
Right.
So that might make sense.
Do you know off the top of your head the kind of the examples we talked about, the Elwha Dam and the other one you talked about, what the cost of restoring those projects were?
I don't know those figures, but yeah, the Elwha, the Glines up in the Olympic Peninsula, and then more recently the dam removals on the Klamath.
Gotcha. So with the funding then, whatever the cost of the project to restore Hetchy, would that come from traditional means of possibly looking at the federal government? Like how does that piece of it work?
I think it's going to be a mixture of state, federal, some ratepayer funds, and some philanthropy, and that's something to be negotiated. I think that the principal costs of water and power might be subsidized by government funds, but ongoing maintenance costs would be borne by ratepayers. Probably a fairly small part of that, but that remains to be seen. And that of course we need some political buy-in just to really have that conversation, and get people to agree on what the options are. Electricity is pretty straightforward. Water's a little trickier. Some forms of replacement of the water are a lot more expensive than others. Recycling is more expensive than groundwater banking, but with recycling you could also help clean up San Francisco Bay, and we've had algae blooms and fish die-offs down in the bay and so forth. And so if we want to clean up San Francisco Bay as San Diego's done on their beaches and so forth, then we get another windfall there, but that's going to be more expensive.
I know in the past it was brought up that San Francisco was not recycling its water. Is that still the case today? Or have they done a little bit better of a job of making sure that they're doing that as everybody else does?
There's no significant recycling in San Francisco. There's some is being done down in the South Bay, but not in San Francisco, not in the East Bay for that matter either. I mean, just very minor amounts within buildings themselves, nothing at the utility scale, nothing like the massive project that we see in Los Angeles and Orange County and San Diego, where the people have really seen the need for to be able to keep people with plenty of water without doing excessive environmental damage.
I gotcha. So with a lot of San Francisco's elected leaders, people that would be involved in these conversations, what has been their reluctance to want to talk about the solutions? Because even from my perspective, a lot of them try to just shut the conversations down as soon as they hear about, let's have a conversation about restoring Hetchy. What is their reluctance, and why have they been so steadfast of maintaining this stranglehold on Yosemite National Park and keeping this opportunity away from the people?
For some leaders in San Francisco, I think this is changing, and we've reached out to the new mayor. Haven't had a chance to meet with him or his staff yet. That's only been a few weeks really, but for some, it goes way back to the fight to build this reservoir in the first place, and all the hype about this is our water. It's the best water quality anywhere, which we've shown through our taste test is not true. And then people don't understand that it's one of 9 reservoirs. They think, if you go into a restaurant, they sell Hetchy water. We have Hetchy water. It's like the name of the water supply is named after the reservoir. Who does that?
Well, yeah, and that's branding to confuse, and they honestly they've used it as a scare tactic. I know that firsthand. Hetchy is not the source of San Francisco's water; it's the Tuolumne River. But they have taken steps to brand it in a way to make it look like that any conversation around restoring the Hetchy Valley means you're not getting your water, and that's completely not true.
And that narrative's changing, but more work needs to be done in San Francisco especially, and among their customers in San Mateo and other counties and so forth. That it's you can't identify that one reservoir with a water system. It's one piece of the water system.
Right. So, what are the next steps?
Well, the next steps are for us are both encouraging access, as we've been talking about, either with the Park Service, with Interior, or maybe through legislation, possibly with court action, because we think some of the restrictions are frankly violating the law. But then, as far as restoration itself, we need to get San Francisco to buy in, and we need to get legislators in DC to buy in. And sort of who blinks first, who goes first, we're open to both possibilities, but we continue to talk to people in Congress and people in San Francisco, and to cut a deal to reform the Raker Act. Water rights don't change, other pipes and reservoirs don't change, but we won't any longer be storing water in Hetchy Valley. Hetchy Valley gets restored, and so we need legislation. We'd like San Francisco to be on board with that legislation, but if they're not, we have to do it anyway.
Well, listen, I mean, I sound like a broken record, but what an opportunity that we have in our lifetime right now. I mean, it's right there. It's like I said, for me, when I have visited Hetchy, I could just see what it's going to be, and the impatient side of me hates waiting, but man, is it worth fighting for, and man, is it worth doing something every day to have a conversation to make sure people know about that opportunity. And yeah,
and people should go to Hetchy and go out there and see it as you have, imagine it as both of us have, think about the opportunity and what it would mean for our country, for our national park system, to go back to realizing the vision of John Muir, of course, but just and especially what it means for the future, to be able to get our water and power, but respect our natural heritage and inspire future generations. There's no other opportunity like that anywhere on Earth, and so that's why you and I think, are both so committed to this and so passionate about it.
Yeah, and you're right. What it would mean for our country. I mean, our country was built on the vision and just the ingenuity, and to be able to go back and correct arguably the largest historic wrong environmental disaster in connection to our parks, and to make sure that the city of San Francisco still continues to get its water and power, and it's just a win-win for everybody, and it can be done. All of the reports have said it can be done, and with in connection to the cost, we can do this. It's right there. So I think it's important that we just act now.
Yeah. And well, thanks so much for having me here today. And I invite anybody listening to this to go on our website, hetchy.org, and look at our materials. Let us know. Email me if you have questions. Spreck at hetchy.org, and love to get more support. And if you're skeptical about us, look at San Francisco stuff. Look at what our opponents say. Hey, we just need more discussion. We want to get this out in the open, and we want something to make something really special happen.
Let's do it. Restore Hetchy. Later, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to The Robert Hanna Show.